through the November CWAC. Elizabeth, would you mind conducting the elections?
Chair Wellner, we've got folks attending in person and online. As a matter of course, let's go around the room. We'll do inner table, outer table, and then go to those who are in our virtual attendance. So, George, can I see it?
Sure. George Marsh, Ag Representative.
Andy Haugen, District 4. Mark Farrow, Builder Developer Representative.
Sheila Labos, City Representative.
Glenn Fee, Environment 1.
Stu Peterson, Business 2. Carrie Song, District 3.
Elizabeth Edwards, Chief of Staff 1.
Matt Wellner, Builder Developer Rep.
Jody Newcomer, Technical Editor 1.
Chad Down, Chief Business Operations Officer.
Logan Olds, Chief Utility Operations Officer, definitely number 2.
Shannon Huggins, Community Engagement. Catherine Mew, Chief Financial Officer.
Chris Faulkner, Planning Manager.
Katie Ragsdale, Executive Assistant.
Josh Veneer, IT Tech.
And let's go in alphabetical order by first name. Ashley, if you're able to say hello.
Hi, Ashley Farrell, Business Rep.
Thank you so much.
I think I'm next. Joe Gall, Chief Utility Relations Officer.
This is Ramesh, District 2.
I hope everyone can hear me. This is Rebecca Shell, District 1.
Hear you. Ramesh, can you try one more time? It's hard to hear.
Okay, sure. This is Ramesh Krishnamurthy, District 2, Palm Trees.
Perfect, we got you. Thank you.
So we've done that part.
Yeah.
So Vice Chair Wellner, all present have been
All
recognized.
present have been
Hey, thank you
recognized.
very much.
Yeah.
And with that, we can go with our first agenda item, which is Chris and Ryan discussing rainfall, flooding, and stormwater, which as George pointed out is very appropriate tonight.
And folks should know, we are recording this meeting. I think we tried Zoom for the first time last meeting. It worked pretty well. We're staying with Zoom and we're using the recording feature. So just so everyone is aware.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Stand up from that camera, also from up there. It's weird. So thank you all for having me this evening. Yes, it is very appropriate to be talking about stormwater and rainfall and other things on a night such as tonight. There we go. So tonight we're going to talk again a little bit about stormwater, kind of flooding, surface water, get into things like when we say 100-year, 500-year, what do we mean, right? We hear a lot of these terms. What do we mean by rainfall, event magnitude, that sort of thing? Talk a little about sort of what contributes to flooding. Coming into the rainy season, flooding suddenly becomes a hot topic. I can't imagine why, but it does. So talk kind of, concerns, right? Like as we look to the future, as a utility, we're always trying to look ahead. What do we kind of see out in the distance, and sort of talk a little bit about what our role is through all of this, along with our partners. So slides are not showing online. Just saw the chat come up. Yeah. Man, how do you know that? She's good.
I think you're supposed to stand in the box. Look, who am I to
They don't see your face if you're in the box there.
On
the floor.
There we go.
We're gonna put you behind the.
Oh, I didn't realize that, right? Can't do my moving around thing. This is All right. If this entire presentation flops because you put me in a box, I just want to understand. So. There we go. We're gonna get there, guys. So kind of, whoa, hey now. So Lee, before we really dive into it, one of the things that we have a lot of these kinds of conversations. We understand that those of us that work in this industry, work in this world, we use a lot of these terms, stormwater, flooding, surface water, quite frequently, but want to make sure kind of everyone's on the same page. So, kind of what is stormwater, right? And it feels very basic, but just making sure everybody kind of understands, we're really talking about runoff. Runoff from roofs, pavement, grass, whatever, into surface water, which is streams, rivers, lakes, that sort of thing. That is the actual definition of stormwater from our current stormwater permit from DEQ. And then also kind of what is flooding? Made the mistake or did the right thing, however you want to look at it, asking a lawyer what flooding was, and they gave me a case definition. So, but flooding is kind of what we all imagine, right? Water that escapes a channel, escapes where it's supposed to be. We call that flooding, right? It's not just natural surface water, it's flooding. I want to make sure we're all on the same page when I use those terms. And so kind of how does it all work together, right? So on the clean water service side, the sort of purplish circle, that's kind of where we live, right? We manage our stormwater permit. We focus on water quality, managing runoff from pavement and pervious surface, that sort of thing. And we also maintain a conveyance system as a part of that MS4, right? As a part of that stormwater system, how we get the water from point A to point B. On the far side, county and cities, they're really sort of the forefront of how to manage and mitigate flooding, floodplain management, floodplain development, that sort of thing. They're the ones that, that we see respond to those much larger events that we're going to talk about here in a moment. And sort of in the middle, right, is surface water. So all of this impacts that, again, the streams, lakes, rivers. Again, making sure everybody sort of understands what we're talking about when we use those various terms. Surface water being anything at the surface, right? Not ground. And so what you may not have known is that there are lots of different kinds of floods. I don't know that I necessarily know this until I found this amazing graphic. And so types of flooding, right? We have our river flooding or fluvial floods, if you want to use those really fancy words as you get to Thanksgiving. You're like, hey guys, I learned about a fluvial flood. Your family will love it. This is really what a lot of us think of, right? Rivers overflow, streams overflow, right? River flooding, flash floods. This is sort of brief, really intense or short duration burst type storms that cause flooding. They can be small, they can be very catastrophic. A lot of folks probably saw the flooding in southern Spain kind of earlier in the month. That was flash flooding, but very much to the extreme. Then we have man-made floods. This is where things like dams and levees fail. One of those sort of examples that I think a lot of folks may or may not know about or may remember is Hurricane Katrina, right? 2005. New Orleans flooded because of storm surge, which is another kind of flooding, but then the levees failed, which created additional catastrophic flooding, and that would be considered man-made floods. So again, coastal floods, that storm surge, we don't worry so much about that here. At least I hope we don't. If so, my geography is terribly, terribly off. Urban floods, we're familiar with that too, right? That pesky lake that forms in the parking lots because the parking lot's drain is clogged, right? Urban flooding caused by lots of asphalt, pavement, impervious surfaces. Our drainage system may be clogged, maybe not functioning properly. And then finally, pluvial floods. This is another one of those big sort of SAT words you can throw around at Thanksgiving, when you're just stuffed to the gills, right? Pluvial floods or aerial flooding is what we also sometimes hear. Is when we get a lot of rain over a long period of time that just creates flooding conditions. It's actually very common here, particularly towards the end of our rainy season when soils are really saturated and we get those like 3, 4, 5, 10 day sort of events. It's not a lot of rain, it feels like, but it sure does cause those flooding issues. That's a pluvial flood. So you can now take this with you and just impress your friends and say, I learned something. And so as we talk about flooding, right, we talk about rainfall recurrence. We talk about 100-year events and 10-year events, but what does that actually mean? And so what it generally means is the percentage chance per year that this thing's gonna happen. So 10-year rain event has about a 10% chance happening in any given year. 100 years, 1%, 500.2%, right? The idea is, we talk about that because it conveys a sense of the probability as well as magnitude. If I tell you that a 100-year event has occurred, something triggers, you're like, oh, that must be pretty big, right? That must be something significant. But it doesn't necessarily translate directly to, but how big, right? And so that's when we dig into this sort of bottom bullet, right? So fill in the blank years, what does that translate to in terms of volume? So this example from Seattle Public Utilities, don't worry, I do have a more local example, but I wouldn't give it away on this slide. A 10-year event over 24 hours in Seattle would be roughly 2.8 inches. 100 years, 4 inches in roughly an hour. 500 years, just under 5 inches in 24 hours. So you have 5 inches of rain roughly in Seattle over a 1 hour period. That's what would you consider a 500-year rain, right? So that starts to kind of scale that for us. And so when we look at rainfall comparisons kind of across the country, I wanted to sort of include some very wildly different places. You know, a 1,000-year 24-hour event in Carson City is 3.5 inches of rain. And, you know, in Portland, that would be somewhere between the 10 and 25 year. In Atlanta, that's barely the 1 year, right? So where we are really dictates what magnitude event, but it still tells us 100 years is big, 500 years big. I will point out Portland does not have a complete data set because the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, that maintains rainfall tables, has not updated rainfall tables in the Pacific Northwest since 1974. They've been around for a second, right? And it's interesting because when we look back at places like Atlanta, Hartford, Carson City that have newer tables, the rainfall amounts and the patterns have shifted. So we're using kind of older data, but Portland luckily has calculated some of their own data. So that's what we see there. And then McMinnville was kind enough to try to estimate a 500-year event. I was going for continuity here. But then how does that translate to flood events, right? Because that's when we really start to think about the 100-year, 500-year type of numbers as flooding. And so a couple of examples, the 96 flood here, I know a lot of folks that are from the Portland area talk about that flood a lot. And so, you know, that was over roughly a 2-week period, about 7.6 inches of rain. February average alone is 5.3, right? So in 2 weeks, you got more than the 1 month average. Preceding that was also snow, ice, and it was really cold. That event that came through is what we call a Pineapple Express, right? So one of those tropical systems that come out from around Hawaii. And so you had warmer weather, you had saturated soil, you had snow on the ground. All that leads to pretty major flood, right? So all those different factors. Another example is in the Atlanta metro area in 2009, I was actually living there then. I remember this. In one location, we got 21 inches in 24 hours. Now the 1,000-year event is only 10.5 inches. That was twice the 1,000-year event. Now that does not necessarily make it the 2,000-year event. That's not how the calculation works. But that's a lot of water in 24 hours. And that wasn't because of a hurricane. That was just one of those, it was a freak storm. And that was probably about 20 or so miles away from where I was living. Where I was living, we got much less rain, but it snarled traffic, flooded streets, had a lot of impact, right? Just a very isolated freak event that may never even happen again in 3 lifetimes, but it happened. And then another one sort of closer in time was earlier in the year in Hartford, Connecticut. They had 16 inches of rain over a 6 to 8 hour period. Their 1,000-year total, give or take, for a 6-hour event is 7.69 inches. So that's an awful lot of rain. And even since then, there's been 1,000-year events in North Carolina, like the Midwest experienced flooding. And so what this starts to make us ask, right, is this still a 1,000-year event? So we say it happens, 0.1% chance in a given year, but it keeps happening. Is it now a 0.1% chance? We'll talk about that in just a moment. And so we talk about rain, we talk about floods, talk about flood plains, right? So I'm not going to read the definition, but there is from the Department of Land Conservation definition of a floodplain. Factors that go into a floodplain are valley channel depth, width, geography, sediment transport. Is there a lot of fine sediment that fills in more frequently? Is it rougher bed so it's a little bit cleaner? The channel slope and land cover, right? So all these things factor into what creates a floodplain. That's actually my neighborhood there. So I can say I live just outside the flood. And so we hear terms like 100-year floodplain, 500-year floodplain. Again, what does that mean, right? And so a 100-year floodplain has about a 1% chance of being inundated in any given year. And if we use rainfall totals for Portland, we'd say that's about 4.7 inches. So if we got 4.7 inches over the span of about 24 hours, we would anticipate the blue area being inundated with water. It's a 100-year flood. 500-year, again, 0.2% chance. 5.5 inches. If we get that 5.5 inch event over 24 hours, we would expect the blue and the orange to be inundated, right? That's not 100% one-to-one, but that again gives you the idea when we talk about a 100-year flood, 500-year flood, what do we really mean by that? And so what contributes to flooding, right? It's usually not just one thing. Excessive extreme rainfall, snow melt. We have saturated ground. I know, talking to our folks in our field operations group, they know and they can tell you they get more calls towards the end of the rainy season because ground is saturated, has nowhere to go than they do earlier in the rainy season. Ryan and I were having a conversation not long after I think our first big rain event in October. And I was like, all right, how many calls did y'all get? He was like, none. He's like, but if I have that same rain event late February, March, we're going to get a lot of calls. I've got data on that. Now, climate change, again, is that 100-year still 100-year? Is it now an 80-year? Right? And then just geography, living at the bottom of a hill versus the top of a hill, very different perspectives on what floods, right? Human contributions to flooding, impervious surface. When we pave over soil, it doesn't absorb water as well. This is how it works. Again, climate change, as we've developed within floodplains, we're concerned about the structures in those floodplains, right? There's nothing in the floodplain and it floods, that's fine. We put a building in the floodplain, especially if it's our building, we care, right? As we have altered streams, it changes the hydrology. Inadequate infrastructure, we've got areas where we built infrastructure under certain sets of conditions at certain times, and it worked great. And then we continue to add to that system, continue to build out, and maybe that infrastructure doesn't work as well. And then also just, development in general, it increases those impacts really from the perspective of, if we flood in the middle of the Everglades, fine. We flood in the middle of the downtown, we really care, right? It's where we put our assets, we put our infrastructure, we put our lives, right? And so those kinds of things make us care more, and it does have those impacts. And so what do we do with flooding here at CWS? Day to day, a lot of this really relates back to our stormwater permit. What do we do to maintain our stormwater system? And so we're out there cleaning out catch basins, we're clearing out conveyances, we have responsibility for some of our roadside ditches, trying to get those things free and clear so that they can convey water when and where they're supposed to. Clear out obstructions and even retrofitting things. If we've got an old stormwater facility that needs to be upgraded, we upgrade that facility. It can now handle more capacity, right? And our guys are out there doing that all the time. Matter of fact, I saw several of our Vector trucks driving around Saturday. So I can vouch they're out there working. Logan, they're doing a good job. From an emergency, perspective, this is where we're a little more in a support role, right? The county usually is at the forefront, or if it's a significant event, TVF&R is leading that. But, we do get calls for, hey, street in front of my house is flooding. We go out, it's clogged full of leaves, right? We'll clear that. We actually do provide sand and bags at our field operations facility. They literally have a pile of sand and a pile of bags. So if you need sandbags, we got you covered. And also we support the county and cities kind of as needed. If there is a larger event and they need our support, we are happy to help them respond. And so this is kind of what I was talking about. We see numbers of calls relative to rainfall, relative to the time of year. This first graph on the left-hand side, this is from December of 2015. If you notice, I would use the pointer, but unfortunately it gets lost on the screen. But the green bars overlay the pink bars. The pink are the actual daily records. We got a lot of green bars on top of the pink bars. So during this time in December 2015, we set daily records. So they got a lot of rain. And Ryan was telling me prior to this event, they had already gotten quite a bit of rain. So they got 221 calls over 4 days. The calls were just ringing off the hook, and Brian and I, talking about it, and he said, he goes, I remember that day. He goes, it is seared into my mind because the rain started and we're like, all right, we're going to be fine. About 5 hours in, we get a few calls, like 12 hours in, it's just nonstop calls, right? And so they're having to respond. Look at the graph over to the right. That's September of 2017. So later in the year, but much less rain, right? 66 calls over 6 days. And if you'll notice, there were even days during that February that didn't rain at all. So, creeks had time to recede, conveyances had time to get cleaned out, soil got to, get rid of some of its water. And one of the things Ryan and I had kind of had a conversation about too is, when we start to look at this, does this mean that maybe we can start to look at some of this data and even more proactively respond? His guys know a lot about our system. They know a lot about, where to be, when to be, that sort of thing. But what if we can start to say, okay, we have this much rain predicted. Can we make sure we go to these areas we know that flood under these conditions and really just, check on them, right? Know how to respond. So that's an opportunity maybe for us to use data that we have to improve operations. And so I want to kind of give an example here, City of Tualatin. I'm not here just to pick on Tualatin, don't worry. This was very random, but
It's a big one for us.
yeah.
You were there?
No.
I was.
Oh, yeah, she was.
Talk us through everything. Tell me everything you remember, because that's everything.
I was thinking about that. How long did the city stay underwater? It wasn't like one day.
No, it was
It
like
was-
2 weeks.
Yeah, it was forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the whole city was underwater.
Clinton came and visited.
What's that?
President Clinton came and visited.
I remember the Century Hotel, my friend Charlie Hunsley, came within 6 inches of it.
Yeah.
Because they built it up before they built it,
Oh.
and then everything else, City Hall, not City Hall, but like Kmart and all that stuff was full of doors.
Yeah, people were boating down, canoeing down Tualatin Sherwood Road.
Yeah, and I remember there was cars that got stuck on Teton at the bridge there, when we were talking about the beavers earlier, and they were carried all the way downtown.
Jeez.
It was pretty remarkable.
Wow. All right. Well, this will be a walk down memory lane for some of
That's
you.
what I've been thinking about the whole time you've been talking about this.
I'm glad I could deliver. This is great. So yeah, so this is kind of, this is sort of, if we were to look at, today, right? What does the 96 flood look overlaid with the data that we have today? And so these are the floodplains, the current map floodplains. 100 years blue, 500 year is.
And that's drawn by the Army Corps of Engineers, isn't it?
This is done by, this is usually, well, the Army Corps may have contributed. Normally they're done as a joint venture between the county and FEMA or the city and FEMA. Corps may have also contributed because you've got the river so close to them. So,
Okay. So it's FEMA and the city and
in the county usually. Yeah, it depends on who all contributes. It's handled differently in different places.
And a little bit of a guess, right?
There is definitely some very educated prediction based on data. I won't use the G word necessarily, but yes, yeah. And so we got that, we overlaid the areas that we know got inundated, right? And this is interesting because some of this, a lot of it was the 500-year floodplain that got inundated, and some of the 100-year floodplain did not. And so it all just depends on geography. And this actually gets back to kind of your comment. We try to be as educated as we can when we use different tools and whatnot, but still doesn't always work that way, right? Why did part of a 500-year floodplain flood, but 100-year didn't, and vice versa? So I don't know. I have no idea. And those were the buildings that either were impacted or would have been impacted depending upon what's new development and what was existing development. So this is one that again, I know folks that have lived in Oregon a long time, from Oregon, like remember this. So this was something that we want to just kind of show again, 7.62 inches over 2 weeks on the heels of a snow, some ice, right? That's a
There was
lot.
snow melt that came down too.
Yeah.
That's what prolonged it. The temperatures got really warm and the Columbia came over the banks. And it's not over the banks, but I remember going downtown on Front Avenue and the ships were above the street. The
Like
boats.
New Orleans again, geez. And so, you know, as we look at flooding, we look at stormwater, you look at all these things, right? They're all very much related. You know, what are some of the challenges, you know, we have? And for us, you know, again, a lot of it really gets back to that infrastructure question. Older versus newer. We have areas that have what we would call urban levels of service, so that curb and gutter, catch basins, right? What we normally see going in. And the newer the area, the newer the infrastructure, and the more updated the standards that infrastructure was built to. We have areas that have what we may consider like a rural level of service, so just kind of grass ditches and just sort of simple open conveyances. And we still have areas like that even within urbanized Washington County. You know, Aloha, everybody that drives through there sees that, right? They still have some of that older infrastructure that may not be able to handle conveyance the way newer infrastructure does. You know, we're working with limited resources. Oftentimes we have our small works program that we haven't really done a lot of projects of, and it's quite I can't remember the number that Ryan normally says, but it's usually like 10 to 15 years. Haven't seen a lot of projects out of that. Our, you know, stormwater capital improvement program, you know, we're just kind of keeping up with what we have now. And so trying to maintain the infrastructure that we have, provide new infrastructure whenever we can. In local improvement districts, we see that tool used more on the sanitary side than we do on the stormwater side, really just because of cost. They get really expensive. And that cost is typically borne by the homeowner. So you can imagine folks sort of at that. You know,
Chris, to channel Ryan in this moment.
Yes,
I
please
think
do.
you'd say on the stormwater management small works program, it was really effective for a period of time and they ticked away at a lot of projects.
There we go.
That were
That's
of
a
certain size. And once they got through that list, right, they really didn't have any more projects that were of $50,000. Like it was.
Something like that, yeah.
It's like small from a capital, what was it?
50.
50, thank you. All right, got it. And so that is sort of now just been, has not been able to be deployed in the same way because we don't have projects of that scale anymore. But it was very effective for a period of time.
Sort of the low hanging fruit kind of
Bingo.
taken care of. Which then kind of, you know, sort of relates into, you know, our continued development. You know, we need to build more homes, we need to build more business, we need to build more stuff. Us trying to keep up and provide that infrastructure, right? Making sure that those facilities don't flood, that they still meet standards, all of that, right? All of those things, you know, have an impact, state and federal requirements. You know, never know what's going to happen during a legislative session, right? But something fun will happen for someone, I'm sure. What does that mean for us? You know, are we going to get more requirements on the storm side, more requirements on the infrastructure provision side, right? And all these things they just have to balance.
Are there not, if we raise the $50,000 cap to $100,000 for the swim programs, would that make any difference?
Logan, if you please.
For other reasons. Makes me sound like I'm, the difficulty has to do with the fact that the low hanging fruit, the $50,000 projects, were done in a manner that they were kind of casual and they really didn't increase risk or liability for the district. So the concern is we have a defined role in managing stormwater through our intergovernmental agreements. And the difficulty is once we get beyond that 50K, you're getting into that gray area about, is it really Clean Water Services responsibility? Should we use ratepayer dollars to that purpose? Or is it another agency, utility, governmental organization's responsibility to do that? And again, those higher dollar values is where those questions become more important. And most importantly is that when we do a project, we're also implying that we're taking some type of responsibility or ownership of that issue when we do that project. And as you can imagine, just with the increasing passage of time, you just see populations becoming more litigious. So we need to be very careful about how we think about risk and these types of projects and what our defined role is in this niche.
Who are the other agencies that would be responsible for the projects for budget?
Well, you know, the cities have certain responsibilities, the county has certain responsibilities, the state has responsibilities. So it's quite an intermesh of groups. Whereas, you know, it's pretty clear cut when it comes to sewage treatment. what our responsibility is. We have an NPDS permit. When you're working through stormwater, you can have different layers where assignments are divvied up, and there's not necessarily a clear funding mechanism for each of those different parties. So it's a very intriguing puzzle and how responsibility is addressed by the different layers of government that work in this area. So again, this is why we need to be very careful about it, because we looked at that, right? Well, what if we increase the level of funding? And I'll tell you, when you look at the 50K, the number is closer to 300K in today's dollars
Yeah.
to do that next level.
So there's no small project.
Yeah, that's what the evaluation led to, is that there may be a couple of those out there who just kind of do them as a matter of course because they're so small, and that the next tranche basically begins at that $300,000 level, and a $300,000 project, because of the level of integration and who all is involved in that space. Just, we need to be very conscious about how we approach those types of.
Because everybody's handling the risk off on the other end.
Now we're set up to maintain the infrastructure.
This is Ramesh online.
So as we think about the future, right, we sort of look ahead. What are we thinking about? We're thinking about we continue to urbanize, right? We continue to produce more housing, we produce more jobs, we produce more opportunities for people to move into the area. But it comes with other factors, right? We have to manage that stormwater. We have to manage that risk. We have to manage those things. You know, one of the graphics I have here, this is what we call a storm hydrograph. So this is one of those other things you can go talk all about at Thanksgiving and really just, I mean, everybody's just going to be blown away, right? So we have, oh, do we have a question? I see.
Joe says.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out,
Question.
sorry, I tried to see how to raise my hand, but I couldn't find the button on my screen. Anyway, let me ask you my question. So it's understandable that any of these floods
Might
or
be on
events
there.
are- Can you hear me? You can hear me, right? Can you hear me or no?
Yeah, what's that contract?
Yeah, it's,
Try again?
Is this okay? Can you hear me now?
Is this
I'll call back.
There we go. Hey. Okay, we got you.
Oh, okay, so you can hear me now.
Yes.
I thought it was my connectivity here and I was trying to plug it. So let me recollect my thoughts. I was trying to say that even though these events are unpredictable and we are trying to find some way to at least anticipate or at least prepare our infrastructure to handle not all of it or the worst case scenario, or at least some of it or most of it. One question I have is on the infrastructure. And you mentioned in this point here that the infrastructure is aging. Now, do we have some kind of an inventory or a complete understanding of what this infrastructure is and what its condition is? For example, in our water board, we are trying to do such an inventory using FRACTA. Do you have something like that to get a good understanding of what infrastructure do we have, how much can it handle, what is its age, where is it going to break, and what's the next calamity we're going to look at? Does that make sense?
it does, yeah. So sort of make sure I understand, you're asking if we have a way of knowing the various ages of our infrastructure, the condition they're in, kind of when they need to be upgraded, service life and all that.
Yes, right.
Okay, excellent. Logan, do we have an inventory of our infrastructure age, condition? He's better to answer this than me.
What's interesting about the question is we need to focus the asset management piece on the stormwater infrastructure, which is the focus of this, because otherwise my brain will focus on the resource recovery facilities and the collection system. So when it comes to, as Elizabeth alluded to earlier, our responsibility with our stormwater infrastructure is for maintenance. We are not the ones who are designing it and responsible for installing it. Our responsibility is primarily associated with the maintenance aspects of that. So yes, we do. And as part of our capital planning process that we go through on an annual basis, we identify operational projects associated with our stormwater system, which are those elements that field operations, Ryan Sandu and his team conduct on an annual basis, as well as capital projects that are part of our understanding of where those infrastructure pieces need additional investment. We also coordinate with the county. So when the county is doing roadway improvements, you can imagine that as part of those roadway improvements, it will often show the need to relocate either stormwater infrastructure or the conveyance system or both of those pieces. And then the other area I would say that we identify is as we see opportunities to improve how flow is transmitted through stormwater infrastructure, we have different ways of managing that flow that we evaluate to improve the efficiency of existing infrastructure. So I think CWAC is well aware that Clean Water Services prides itself on science-based solutions, and where we can find science-based solutions to provide better alternatives for the member cities, whether it's development or other types of projects that occur, we incorporate those into the process as well. So there's multiple layers where we look at the infrastructure from our own planning, from working with other cities, as well as looking into the future and partnerships to evaluate it.
You guys did do stormwater infrastructure in North Bethany. But that's the last county UGB expansion area. So any other UGB expansion areas with any stormwater infrastructure that wasn't done by private development would be done by the cities and not the district.
I am not an expert at all of this. Andy Braun is the one who really understands what all of the different relationships and roles are of the different parties. So I would just have to defer to him, and Ryan is another really good resource as well. So it does depend on where the infrastructure is being developed, and Ramesh's question was largely related to existing infrastructure.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
And I will say one of the other areas and brought it up is as areas redevelop, right? That infrastructure is typically upgraded to meet whatever the current standards are. You all are very aware of that. And one of the other things too that we're starting to have conversations around is as we look to needing to update things like stormwater standards because of our permit, is there a difference in maybe the design storm we used to use versus the new? We're starting to have those conversations really to kind of think about what does the future look like? It probably doesn't look like yesterday, but what does tomorrow hold for us? So that's kind of fits into all of this here, really. Again, as we talk about, climate change, again, we sort of talked earlier, is the old 100-year event the new 80-year event, right? What does that do? What does that mean? Even from just a stormwater water quality perspective. So we have to address certain size storms. What does that look like? And I was sort of talking about the hydrograph here, right? As we continue to develop, redevelop. I don't want to go away without looking at the graphic here, because again, you're going to love telling this to people. Under undeveloped conditions, we have the green line. So it rains, water gets soaked into the soil, sort of builds up, hits the creek. We see an increase in volume in the creek, gradually recedes. A lot of that water goes back out and supports way around. A lot of the water that's in the soil creates base flow. So we get creeks that sort of run longer throughout the year. As we develop, as we create impervious surface, those storms look different, right? Not as much water soaks in, so we get those higher peaks, more water out at one time in a creek, then the water recedes, and so we may not get that base flow. And all of this sort of factors into stormwater, it factors into flooding, factors into surface water, right? And again, we talked about the aging infrastructure, future challenges, state and federal requirements again. We don't know what our next permit's gonna look like. We don't know what the next set of requirements that the state hands us, the federal government hands us. And so we're all trying to sort of manage and adapt through that in real time. But one of the things that we do well here at Clean Water Service, right, is we try to innovate and try to support innovative solutions. So folks are familiar with North Bethany, with River Terrace, with Reed's Crossing. Those were greenfield expansion areas, right? We've done some beautiful stormwater facilities there that have helped manage quantity, quality. But what about redevelopment? And these are examples that I'm familiar with, especially the two kind of on the side. What if we're able to support through infrastructure land use decisions that provide for better infrastructure from that sort of land use development perspective? This one in particular at the bottom right, anyone that's been around me and wants to talk stormwater for more than about 20 minutes, I pull this picture up on my computer all the time. So if you've seen it already, I'm sorry. But this is historic Fourth Ward Park in downtown Atlanta. When I first moved to Atlanta, that was just an old industrial parking lot. So all that was, and there was some significant flooding problems or water quality problems. That building kind of in the very back, that brick building, that's the old Sears building. That was the largest freestanding brick building in the Southeast. It's a thing, something like 1.5 million square feet. So it's a big, beautiful building, basement was flood. And someone said, what if we made the infrastructure different? What if we did the infrastructure different for us? And so what they came up with is this is a stormwater pond. It can hold up to a 500-year event. It has water quality features. It has a splash pad, not from the stormwater. Be very clear about that. It's a terrible idea. Don't do that. But from the time that they actually announced this, I think it was around 2008. The designs came out in 2011. $500 million had already been committed to develop around it, right? So we're taking infrastructure, we're really updating it, we're really fixing problems, but then we're using it as sort of a catalyst, right? And so, how does Clean Water Services fit into that? We don't know yet, but this is where I get to show that I actually am a planner by training. So I get to be super aspirational and show really pretty pictures as my very last slide. So look at that. That was seamless, wasn't it? I didn't rehearse that. Any other questions for Logan specifically? No.
I'll go back to the 100-year floodplain and how they define it now. As I understand it, like you said, it's a lot of guys, right? There's a lot of people that get involved. So do they calculate the impervious surface since the last time and how often do they do it from the bank? How often do they actually reevaluate it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I believe they do use impervious surface calculations because you will see if you look at like a historic floodplain map from, let's say 50 years ago, it may look very different than it does today. How often they do that, I don't recall.
Every 10 years, if I remember.
That feels right, because that's usually when the census comes out. And so EPA updates what they consider urbanized areas and all of that. But some of it too, you can also go through a process where you can request map updates through FEMA, through the floodplain program.
Yeah, I see.
That sort of thing too.
I think it's every 10 years they reevaluate, but
That feels right, but I'm not 100%.
they actually calculate the size of culverts that were built and stuff like that, if I recall.
And it has gotten better because now we can use things like, LiDAR. So you can actually better gauge through a desktop exercise elevation changes, as opposed to it used to be some guy has to go out and just take elevations and you kind of hope they're right. It's a lot more accurate now, but still obviously not perfect.
Chris, do you know when NOAA's gonna update their rain roughly?
So right now, the only states that don't have I'll call them modern tables it's Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, I believe, are slated to be completed in either 25 or 26. I've not seen a date for Oregon and Washington. I do want to point out the irony of a place that gets a lot of rain not having updated tables. NOAA, come on, guys. Why Nevada first? They're a desert. So yeah, that's probably right.
Are there any statistics that equate or somehow show that X amount of investment? So your lower right-hand corner photo, you alluded to the fact that there is $500 million worth of committed infrastructure to surround that project. I'm just wondering if there's a general statistic that shows if you invest for a certain class of infrastructure facility, that it could potentially equate to an additional investment of X amount.
I've not seen a study that shows specifics like that. I've seen sort of the general, back when green infrastructure was really having its moment in the early 2000s, there was a lot of studies that if you use green infrastructure in and around certain like multifamily dwellings, things like that, you can see up to a 30% increase in rents and leases. But I've not seen if you build this kind of infrastructure, and I know there's a lot of jurisdictions that have done some pretty innovative things with infrastructure. Things like they build facilities and it generates a certain amount of credits and they sell the credits out of it, right? And so that sort of thing. I know one of the cities I used to work closely with, they were trying to spur their sort of downtown redevelopment. So they actually just built a large sort of park and pond, and they allowed developers just to pay into that because it checked all the boxes, right? But it was also this nice feature. But I don't know what the actual like $1 amount was on that. So
That's a great idea because you're basically building some kind of, it's almost like a sinking fund that you would allow. That's, sorry, I'm not a planner, but this is fascinating to me because I like.
Oh, buddy, I could spend 2.5 hours talking about this.
Yeah.
I was contacted by somebody with Old Castle recently that was asking me about, he approached me because of my builder developer role on this committee and saying that they are working on some kind of a filter system that they're trying to get the district to buy off on, and then you guys are having conversations with them, and that seems to be going well, but he was saying it from a cost benefit perspective to the building community. Are there other, I guess, like whatever their system is, are there other technologies, other small businesses, Old Castle's not small, but are there other businesses that are trying to kind of produce things that make stormwater management more cost effective?
There's a number of companies out there that do a lot of what we call proprietary devices, right? So it's sort of, it's kind of a widget. You plop the widget in, the widget does what it's supposed to do with stormwater. It could be filtered, could be capacity, that sort of thing. Old Castle's one, Contech is the other big one, blanked on that. And we do have folks here, they're over kind of on the other side of my division in our development services group. So a lot of Damon's folks, they're the ones. And so they're the ones that talk to you about which ones allowed, unallowed, but there are a lot of those products out there. Okay. Okay. All right.
So what we hear on the news, when a river is approaching flood stage, what occurrence does that roughly equate to?
It depends on the river. So for instance, if the Mississippi River is approaching its flood stage, that's a very large event, right? Beaverton Creek approaches flood stage, much smaller event. And so it all really depends on the system. Trying to think back when I was younger, I think it was like 93, there were the massive floods on the Mississippi River. And I think, somebody had something that was like over 1,000-year event kind of thing, right? But it was such a large area that flooded, such a volume of water, snow melt, and all that. So it's hard to say, X river is at a flood stage. It's this many feet above flood stage, below flood stage. What that equates to, at least I think.
It leaves the channel. Is that the idea?
Yeah. Yep.
And I have a question online.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. If not, wave or something. You anticipated my question a bit by showing that last slide with some exciting gray-green infrastructure. So thanks for that. I guess I'm not so much of a question, so much as a constellation of thoughts that I've been thinking in the last couple of minutes. And I just wondered if you could talk about, given what I'm hearing about your planning background too, if you see any points of intersection that between the intergovernmental agreements that we were hearing about last week and the this idea of green infrastructure retention and your forward climate focus, and if there's maybe a mechanism or could be a mechanism in place given this IGA process that CWS is in.
Sure, I'll talk a little about that. Joe can jump in.
I see if Joe wanted to jump in.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
Joe, go. Elizabeth called on you.
Yeah, great question. And hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm going to actually kick it back to you in a second here, Chris. So certainly we've been talking with some of our cities. Beaverton comes to mind. They have Old Town Beaverton, which a lot of Old Town Beaverton has flooding issues. A lot of it's in floodplain. We've been talking from a sub-basin planning aspect with the city about how to be creative in that area because of the challenges in terms of redevelopment and using green infrastructure, as you allude to, Rebecca, and some of the things that Chris is so excited about from his Georgia days. He gets very excited about visioning what could be in downtown Beaverton. And staff there is talking with us about that. Where that goes, we don't know, but we certainly, that's an area that I think there's some ample opportunity as a redevelopment area and a unique area. What happens out in Cooper Mountain in a greenfield area is very different than how we tackle stormwater in downtown Beaverton. But it's in conjunction with the city. It's not CWS coming in and telling the city what to do. We I think kicking around, how can we do things differently to achieve your community's vision and handle stormwater in a different way than other parts of your city? So it's a great question. I think Beaverton's probably the city that comes to mind that we're the closest with in terms of talking about some different approaches. Chris, do you have anything more that I'm missing? And this is the thing that you get very excited about. So
I wasn't kidding when I said I could do this for 2+ hours. No, I think you nailed it. I think just sort of, I know the IGA question comes up. I think the one thing it's done is just, it helps us have conversations, right? Like a lot of newer staff and all the jurisdictions are getting to know each other. And so recognizing that there's a lot of value in that very upfront planning work, which makes me happy because I'm a long-range planner, right? And so, yeah, I think hopefully we'll see more of those kind of Beaverton-like conversations. I'm always up for having.
If I could follow up, I don't know if that's permitted. Okay. I guess to just point a little further along this road, are there mechanisms besides friendly conversations and encouragement, or not really? I'm still kind of learning the relationship between CWS and the participants in the wider metro network.
So Chris, can you touch on, you have some money we have some money in our budget. You've kicked around some like step one with Beaverton where we might be able to provide some funding. Can you talk about that a little bit to kind of move the ball forward rather than just talking?
Yeah.
How do we move it to something coming to fruition?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we have been trying to be more intentional about is one, understanding when our partner jurisdictions, the cities, the county are going to go into a very early planning phase, right? They're thinking about a redevelopment plan, an expansion plan, that sort of thing. And so we've been programming some dollars into our budget so that we can not only go to them and have a casual conversation, at least just to sort of test the waters, right? But once we start to really think that there's a there, be able to say, okay, let's sit down and we can come up with a scope. We can bring on consultant support if we need to, so we can start to pull together existing data, pull together existing plans. Let's do some visioning. In terms of Beaverton, I think because they've been so short-staffed for so long, kind of getting Cooper Mountain to a really good place. But yeah, we actually had a really good conversation with them last Friday, and just kind of said, what are some next steps? And so what we've kind of identified is we need to get some of our staff talking. We need to understand, okay, what are those sort of potential pinch points? What are the feasibility points? And we want to start to sit down and figure, okay, who's going to take the lead and the role on collecting the data, on identifying the stakeholders, on talking to the stakeholders, all of that. To Joe's point, we also want to be very cognizant that some jurisdictions are farther down the path on some of this than others. And so those that are ready to sort of take it on, we want to support. Others, we're helping to come alongside and sort of lead that process. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's kind of where we are, where are they happy to come back after we have more of these discussions and see really what starts to bubble up? Can certainly do that.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's helpful, but at least in Tualatin, and I don't know how it works in other cities, but we have a stormwater master plan that was adopted in 2019, and Clean Water Services worked with us on that. And then we have a whole greenfield development area called Basalt Creek, which is between us and Wilsonville. And we have an addendum to the Stormwater Master Plan that's specific to, it creates a sub-basin in that area. And we worked very closely with Clean Water Services to identify new development areas and drainage, and that when new development comes in, we'll, I don't know what we'll do, but that like it lays it out in this addendum that that Clean Water Services like worked with us to be proactive in terms of incoming development.
And I'll say too, you know, a lot of these conversations around sub-basin plan, I know I spoke to CWAC some years ago on that very topic. That sort of program, that process continues to evolve. You know, we're learning more, we're understanding more when we need to be involved so that we're not coming in just at the wrong time. Because there's a lot of great ideas that happen after things are done, right? So we're learning, I think, more and more and learning better where we fit in that process. I won't say it's all me, but you know, I'll take a little credit. But Elizabeth's gonna tell me to sit down now, so. It's not all at all. It's definitely, I think an understanding that there's a lot of great opportunities. There's a lot of, you know, flexibility in permits. There's a lot of just good things that we can all do together. So just understanding when to start talking about that. And so, you know, again, Beaverton's sort of a unique example. They've done a lot of planning in their downtown area. They've taken a couple bites at that apple. And I think now they're sort of poised to say, how do we bring it all together and really do something with it? So.
When did you come to the district?
I got here January 23rd of 2019.
So it's only been 5 years that we've really been doing this kind of system planning in collaboration with the jurisdictions.
Yes, and there was a pandemic in there. I like to forget that, but it was really hard to have a lot of these kind of conversations and planning meetings over Zoom when no one knew where the mute button was. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? So, and not for you, but how do I see that somebody has a question other than Joe telling us?
I think Joe's doing a great job.
He is doing a great job, but is there Joe, are you seeing hands from somebody?
Yeah, occasionally I'll see hands from
And just
the,
physical hands?
yeah, there's hands from the commissioners that I see everybody on my screen that maybe you don't see. So that's why I'm
Okay.
in the
Thank
chat
you.
thing, just so you don't miss anybody. So.
I'm just used to little yellow.
They're showing up.
Yeah, just disappeared.
Yeah.
Is that
All right.
why your picture is black and white, Joe?
Say that again?
Your picture comes off black and white. Why is that?
No.
Okay, with that, thank you. Yes, we've got Kathy next for our agenda item, budget 201.
Is it ready?
For having here today, talk a little bit about budget. You might remember that I came back earlier this year and talked about budget 101, and that was really looking at our specific elements of our 24 adopted budget. So today we're going to expand that discussion a little bit.
That was not bad.
Okay. You guys are doing it. There we go. There you go. Makes sense. All right. So today we're going to talk first about a little bit about the results of operations for fiscal year 24. We are concluding our audit right now. We have our financial statements done at the end of this month, and an opinion issues we're hoping to issue by the first part of December for our annual comprehensive financial report for 24. So we'll talk a little bit about the results of those operations. Then we're going to look at the 25 budget that was adopted by the board and been reviewed by our budget committee and approved. And we're also going to touch on an area and to expand on some of the mid-year adjustments that we've done to date on that adopted budget. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the budget calendar for this. Now we're already in another budget season for 25-26. So first starting about looking at results of operations for 24. So this graph right here is showing you 5 years of actuals, revenue collected as a comparison to budget by quarter. We started putting this presentation together for our board back during the beginning of the pandemic, really looking at to make sure we're on track on revenue collected and expenditures. As we looked at some of those non-departmental items I talked about that we would appropriate, but not bring up into the budget for FTE ads and such, until we felt like we had a stable operating budget. So right here, we're looking at revenue collected, and as you can see, our largest revenue source is rate revenue. And so that really tells you why, when you look at quarter over quarter, year over year, we're relatively consistent in that collection. 25% in Q1, 50% Q2, 75% Q3, and 100 or over in Q4. So pretty consistent pattern there. You might note that in 2024, when we ended that light blue line there on the end, we actually came in under our normal average at 105% at 96. And that really, it isn't related to service revenues. It's related to STCs that we collected. We had a significant decline in that year, and that's a volatile revenue that's just based on development that happens. This is showing you the other side, the expenditure side. So this is percentage of budget expended for that 5-year period. This one doesn't, isn't as smooth as the rate collection, and it really relates to how we account for expenditure. So the first part of the year, you have a lot of invoices coming in that really relate to the prior fiscal year, so we're accruing those back. So your activity in the first quarter is pretty low, 14% of budget collected, because we're really waiting for those invoices to come in. It's 36% in Q2, 53% Q3, and then finally in Q4 is where we bring in the larger percentage of that budget, and that's where once again you're going into the new year and accruing back expenditure specific that year. For 2024, we ended the year with 84% expend. So we actually ticked up in our expenditures in 2024, and that really related to our capital program and some major capital expenditures. So overall results of operations, we saw there 96% of the budget revenues were collected. Expenditures were at 84% of budget. And when you compare that to fiscal year 23 at 69, that big difference really was we didn't spend, the capital program didn't spend at the levels we had planned in that year. And the net overall results of operations was an increase in our unrestricted reserves by 18 million. And those reserves then can be used for future working capital needs and infrastructure investments.
Kathy, when you pull capital out of the expenditures, what percentage of the operating budget are we expending?
I didn't bring that particular slide. I want to say that we're like 80% on the operating side, but the capital side, it ticked up. So, but it's still spent below that 80 percentile, but the dollar amount it's ticked up as compared to the prior year and the budget.
Given the prior chart, I mean, is there a financial goal to only spend 75 or 80% of the expenditure budget? It seems like that's the path.
Yeah, we had a challenge in the past that we over budgeted on our capital side, so we were significantly underspending our budget. And so last year was the first year we went in and really tried to develop our budget so that we were spending more in line with what we budgeted. And in fact, last 24 was the first year we had to do a budget transfer in capital because of the purchase of the Central. It was Central, and we had to move money in so we wouldn't overexpend that appropriation. So that's how much tighter we're budgeting our capital. We try to be within that 90 percentile of budget to actual.
Is this cash basis accounting or accrual?
Full accrual. A budgetary modified accrual.
Sorry, say what?
The budgetary is modified accrual, so a little bit different than full accrual. And when you look at our financial statements, we do a lot of adjustments to these budgeted numbers to make them in line with generally accepted accounting principles. So a lot of different types of entries go in to identify your balance sheet items and your. Yes, so the financial statements are GAAP, the budget is modified. So for those continued operations, some of the key drivers in there, like I mentioned before, we did, our service fees, actually, we saw an $8.5 million increase or 5.1%, which is really in line with the 4% rate increase that we did in that year. System development charges, we see a decrease of 12.3 million or 39%. That's a volatile revenue source. It depends on the year. We actually had a record year before with Beaverton and Hillsborough having some significant project revenues coming in. But it was down in 24. Labor costs, we have an increase of 6%. This really relates to the added FTE to the budget, along with, pay for performance, class and comp, and other benefit cost increases. On the material and services side, we have a $6.6 million increase or 18.4%. Some of the key pieces of this was an increase in insurance costs. We had an increase in evaluation of the Durham Water Resource Recovery Facility, so that increased some of the insurance costs there. And we also added cybersecurity coverage in that year. We also saw some increases on the contract and professional services side, and some of those key areas in there was really bridging some of the vacancies in some of our positions that were hard to fill. We utilized contract labor at times, so we saw a little uptick in that category. And then also just normally, chemical and energy, we do see increases as we meet regulatory requirements. On the capital side, we saw an increase of 38.7 million or 83%. We had some big projects in 24. We had the Rock Creek Primary Care Line number 4, that was a $16.6 million outlay. We had the central building we bought at 11.6 million. And then we had the Durham Phase 6A fermenter, the 8.3 million. So we had some large projects that were delivered on in 24. So now as we transition then so these were the budget drivers specific to our adopted 25 budget. They didn't vary much from the previous year. And we were really looking at some key areas where we put our money was investment in our people. So trying to recruit and retain quality staff in a hard to recruit environment. So investing money in that program and restoring some of the training that we had not been doing during the pandemic. Similarly, regulatory compliance is always a driver in our budget, and we have a new permit we're doing requirements under, and we're also looking at testing moving towards a future permit. And then the exposure that we had in the business and client, some of those inflation impacts, some of the development going on in the industrial area, and then just our investment in our capital programs. So 2025 adopted budget, you've seen this one before. I always show it because I think it's just does a really good job of showing you the resources and how they're used. So the revenues proposed at 225.2 million, they're going out to pay for operating and other outlays of 141.5 million, debt of 17.2 million, and our capital program investments at 104.4. 24-25 our rates and charges, we did an increase of 4% on the sanitary and storm service fees. That resulted in about a $2.50 average increase in the monthly bill for a residential customer. We also did some increases on our STC side, only related to the inflationary factor for cost construction. It was 2.7% in that year based on the ENR index. So it increased by only $185 on the sanitary to $7,009 and $18 on the swim STC at $678. This just gives you an idea of so it's showing you 2 years of actual, the revised budget for 24, and then the adopted budget for 25. So usually included in the budget document. And these service charges are our main revenue source within for the utility. And when you look at that graph, it's showing you that consistent but limited rate increases over time, and that's really our goal. And when we develop our forecast, 10-year forecasts in our rate development, keeping those increases predictable and level. So when you look at our 10-year average, it's a 3.44% annual average increase in the rate over the past 10 years. So we've tried to keep that rate increase down. System development charges that you see there, pretty volatile. And so in the 2025 budget, we actually reduced down our estimated revenue to from 27 and 24 to 21, just based on the activity we saw happening in 24. On the expenditure side, the operating budget, the 263.1 million, it's a 3.5% increase budget over budget. So that's looking at the revised 24 budget to the adopted 25 budget. So taking into account all those mid-year changes that we did on the budget. That results in 6.7 million in departmental operating, and in that 5.4 million of that is personal services really related to FTE ads and a full year of the ads that occurred in 24. And then 1.3 million on material and services, and that really relates to some of the increases in software, our regulatory, energy and chemical, those different kinds of costs that you see increase year over year. But then also we had an added some of the watershed program, their stewardship programs. They used to be in our capital budget. Some of those transferred over to operating. Now they do the stewardship and maintenance of those properties. So that added to the material services number. The $3.1 million increase in capital, once again, we have some big projects out there. This is 25, plan 25, and Ripple at 11.2 million. For Forest Grove primary treatment, it's 17.8 million. And the Rock Creek primary clarifying number 4 at 8.3 million. So another year of some big projects out there for development. Debt service went down 1.8 million. And the story behind this, it's actually in line at 1.7 million with past years. But in the budget last year, we put in a $50 million debt issuance in case we decided to go and that route for funding capital projects. The interest rates weren't good. We decided not to go that route. And so we didn't issue the debt. So that additional debt service that was in last year's isn't there any longer. So that's why it shows a decrease at this point. And then other funding outlays, that one actually too didn't change year over year. That particular line item includes in it usually bad debt, franchise fees, pass through revenues to the cities for their row fees and local. And then that component we talked about of that non-departmental appropriation that usually sits at about 4 million. And that's that money we put in there that throughout the year, we look to see if there are business case for certain position ads or some additional redesignations or class of comp. So it's a pot of money that we have available there as we go through the years to strategically put it up into other department programs. It does require board action. So anytime we would move any of that non-departmental, we would have to go to the board to spend it. It went up 1 million, and the story behind that is really just that last year we transferred just under 1 million out of that non-departmental up into those line items to fund FTE ads and class and comp. So that year over year just looks like it went up 1 million, but it's actually staying level in 25. And so for expenditure trends, it was once again showing to this is in the budget document to actual, the 24 revised with transfers, and then the budget for 25.
Kathy, on those, this maybe is a broken record question. On those departmental expenses, if our actuals are at 80 and 90 in 22 and 23, why are we budgeting at 30 and 40 million dollars more when we're only spending 80% of the operating department expenditures?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that inside of those departmental numbers is that positions that we're trying to fill that we're having difficulty recruiting for. So there's some vacant positions. We also increased the budget So this revised budget is bringing in some of those mid-years that we approved during the million in mid-year that we moved back up from non-departmental. It's moved into that revised budget number. And in 25, we're just seeing some increases related to, like we mentioned, the labor, the FTE adds, year over year, class and comp, other benefits, and then of course the energy and chemical regulatory. So it's really, and of course, obviously how you end the year, some of that also depends on how strong the capital program is, because operating moves money out of, so capital programs, their operating costs, the labor moves into a capital program. So in years where you have a really strong capital program, you'll see your departmental labor go down because it's moving into those capital projects as project managers are charged into the project itself. So in years where you don't see as much capital activity, you might also see the labor higher on the operating side because they're not moving into the capital project.
Answer your question.
I guess I'm probably just missing something. So I'm just thinking about that prior chart where it showed the past 5 years, we've spent at 80% of budget. So if that's our trend, why don't we just adopt a budget that's 90% of what these numbers are? So we get that budget in line with what we're actually spent. And maybe I'm probably just missing something.
I'm actually in the same boat.
Well, some of it, because we do have to in the budget appropriate for the approved positions that we have. So even if they aren't filled, we do include those in the budget. And our hope is to fill them. But we've had those challenges in the last few years. And so that's a component of that isn't spent. But the other piece too is just capital and how it rolls out, what you budget and what you end up deploying. Like you see in 23, we had a significant reduction in the capital just based on some of the economic situations and rollout of projects. But yeah,
And I was gonna say, if Holly were here, it would be helpful to know just how many FTE, but it's at least 30 that are.
So we have right now 50 FTE we're recruiting for. And I believe 20 of those I heard today were in active recruitment. 20, they're being reassessed and determine, how to utilize that FTE. And some of these are just hard to fill positions. And some of them are groups that have had transition and they're looking to build their program back up. So utilizing, your new managers in that group to help develop the program. So yeah, so some of it is the vacant positions. Yeah.
It's improving though. We were at 85% fill rate. So for the longest time, we struggled with about 15% vacancy within the organization, which is actually normal in our industry and many industries. We recently are approaching about 90% fill rate. So, and that was our goal, is to kind of have 10% or less vacancy. So we're actually doing better.
Try to bring your budget more in line with your expenditures.
Yeah. It actually kind of makes me nervous as we fill those, we're gonna be having to monitor our budgets even tighter. To make sure that we have the appropriation levels correct because we actually appropriate at department program levels. So it's pretty tight budget, in particular in a group that is fully staffed.
So what I assume to be surpluses, have those gone into reserves every year? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, so the 18 million goes in, so our statements show you our reserves. Some of them are restricted. So restricted reserves relate to, and that's roughly 50 million, relates to SDCs that can only be used for capacity enhancing and also debt related payments. All the other accounts, some we dedicate related to capital investment, but some is related to reserves for working capital. So yes, the 18.1 million goes back in unrestricted, and we can utilize that then for infrastructure build or other working capital needs. And just, I noted there, the other outlay that nominal year in twenty-two, I think we talked about that before, but that was a refunding of our 2011B bonds. So that was the payment to refund them. And got us a 6.1 million net present value savings with that. And in 2025, when you go all the way over to other outlays, you see that 11.1 million, that includes 4.1 million that's in that undesignated category, non-departmental, for FTE ads or class and comp, other things that come in throughout the year.
Kathy, did you say we have a $51 million reserve fund?
So the 50 million is restricted. Reserves. 400 million is unrestricted.
We currently have a $400 million unrestricted reserve.
Yes, some of it we indicate as dedicated for capital. But yeah, we have the ability, that is not legally restricted. And we can use it for capital projects or across multiple funds.
Is there a plan to spend that down so that it maybe is more in line with, if our annual budget is $250 million, we've got a $400 million reserve. Is there a plan to get that more in line with some gap, some general, I don't know, goal?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We're actually in the process of putting together a reserve policy that should be adopted by a board, and that in there, that we would look at how we would utilize some of those reserves. Because we do have some contingencies out there, like if there was an earthquake and the coverage that we would have and things that would not be covered, having some reserves related to that. The infrastructure build, we're looking at significant outlays in the next few years. And then, obviously other elements, the regulatory requirements and infrastructure changes that need to happen to cover those regulatory requirements. So we try to identify some of those reserves related to future regulatory and capital investments that need to happen. We actually have some significant investments too that we need to do in just maintain our existing infrastructure that's aging. And Scoggins Dam as well.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
we're gonna do it again.
Yeah.
Elaine's got a question, but didn't I remember from budget committee last year that we reached our reserves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have, the last few years, we've had net increases in unrestricted. And we pinpoint those definitely to meet those infrastructure investments in the future, be it Scoggins Dam, be it totally new regulatory required treatment facilities, and then the repair and maintenance that needs to happen.
And I remember a fairly robust conversation about
Yeah.
that specific, because it was a big number.
Yeah. And we actually, I think, were you at the 25 adopt? Yeah, so we talked in there, we kind of introduced that policy that we're going to be bringing forward.
Yeah, okay.
To the board reserves and how we earmark components of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Elaine?
Yeah, thank you. I think, Kathleen, you may, if I can just kind of state in a different way what I think my understanding is. First off, in terms of budgeting, when you create your budget, you actually request appropriations for all of the positions you want to fill, all of the capital projects you have. And so it's kind of like if all of the planets line up, you're going to do everything and you're going to spend it all. But underspending a budget, I don't know, it doesn't, and maybe it's because I spent my entire life in government. It feels like it's not an irresponsible thing to do. It's simply a matter of how things are rolling out in terms of timing for expenses and projects and hirings and such. The other thing I wanted to mention, which I think you just touched on, is I remember Diane telling us last year or the year before that with the new regulatory requirements like our slow march to osmosis and some of these other things that are coming down the pike, one of the goals that Clean Water Services leadership has is to avoid sudden, large increases in rates and be predictable and kind of tee the agency up to be able to handle what comes in terms of regulation and new techniques and new treatment strategies without having to shock the ratepayers for the money. Is that right?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, thank you. So, yeah, great, yeah, thank you. Yeah, yes, that is true.
Great.
Right, and so that was the adopted budget for 25. Mid-year, we've already had some R&Os that have gone to the board related to labor. We had one in August that was approved by the board, and that added 2 FTE and redesignated as part of that, class and comp, 30 positions. And then in October, we did another R&O specific to labor that did redesignation of 4 positions. So we've had 2 R&Os that have gone to the board to date. We have another planned one that's in draft that for December, the first part of December, that's looking at a 3 FTE and a redesignation of 8 at this point. And after that, those 3 R&Os go through, however they land. At the end of December, we plan to bring a budget transfer to the board for approval. And in there, we will fund the 3 R&Os related to labor changes. And then also during mid-year, we have found we've added a cyber audit contract that we're going to fund in legal. And then we have 2 contracts for regulatory affairs with DEQ and USGS that we need to add some funding for that weren't anticipated.
Kathy, will you say R&O?
Resolution and order. So it's an official board action approving those FTE. And then when we go to the board, we're going to do another resolution order that would approve the transfer of contingency and that non-departmental up to appropriated departmental programs.
Presume cyber audit means security.
Yes, so, yeah. And so some of the December stuff came up after we had completed the presentation, slides, so that's why it wasn't there.
I'll just say it real quick, cybersecurity is a growing issue, especially in our industry, so it's a timely use of.
One of the rest.
Just a lot more increase of cyber attacks occurring, and we had CrowdStrike outage, which was not a cyber attack, but it was basically an advanced tabletop exercise, right, of what happens when a system goes down. And so it just has us reflecting on the kinds of investments we need to make in order to stay. I don't know, we actually hired for it yet. No, we got approval to do the contract, but
Yeah, I think it will have for last Tuesday, or maybe it's on the.
here's last Tuesday.
yeah.
A lot of our operational, like our facilities have electronic, I mean, if we were to be attacked, disastrous for our operations. This is all electronic.
But I should also say, like, we have put good measures in place thus far. We're proud of the work that we've done, and our plants are totally separate.
You have redundancy every.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I saw that.
Yeah.
So that was some of the budget initiatives going on for 25. Now we are already in the budget for 25-26. We started a first meeting in late September of the budget committee, and that's where we really put together our budget calendar for the year. The planning out. Budget calendar is really a key project management tool to get the budget done timely. There's key decisions that have to be made in different areas in a certain sequence to get us down to where we have our proposed budget and getting it out timely so that we can deliver to the budget committee 2 weeks before the budget committee meeting. So we have a tight deadline, a lot of things going on all at the same time, a lot of different departments involved. At the same, so just so you're aware too, on October 7th, we already started the FTE. So I'm not here, but October 7th, we already started the FTE. So we distributed out to all the programs instructions telling them if they wanted to add FTE. The budget process is where we proposed to add FTE. So we distributed those out with information. They were just due back last Friday. So so now we're starting to compile that information. At the same time, we're in the middle, departments, programs are in the middle of updating their roadmaps for 26. It was due 11/1, and I have to admit, I'm still working on mine, so. And so I'm sure there's some other groups that are still working to complete those, but we're working on the roadmap that really then helps drive what are we gonna fund and what are we gonna do in this next budget year. Between the 11, 18, and 12/4, we're reviewing those requested adds and we're making determinations and decisions on which positions we want to add. That's it's a really detailed and process, but it's really, really important to that operating budget piece because by identifying those positions, we could load those then into the operating budget. So then when we push out the operating budgets in December 9th, they already have the FTE adds in there and they're able then to see their budget over budget changes if there are any kind of requested and keeping your budget in line with 5% or 4% or whatever kind of direction they're getting. And then also allowing them then to add in any related costs for that FTE like training or vehicles. So, and right before the operating goes out, the CIP goes out. We opened up the CIP on December 2nd. And it closes, return is supposed to be completed by January 6th. This year, we are doing a lot of new training and documentation of the process. We've been working on a goal share this year to really help define what is a capital project, what fund should it be in, is it repair maintenance, is it new construction, defining funding sources. And then, so working through really getting and drivers for the project. Is it regulatory? Is it repair? Is it capacity? So really trying to populate some of these things in the CIP to help us with that final CIP document that we produce out with the budget. And actually around January, that's when we set our prime sanding swim fees, and we determine our key rates that we're going to be loading into our budget as we try to start to formulate. But then we're also pushing out the rates and charges for the groups to review and update if they have increases in their areas based on maybe some of the permit fees that are based on a labor component for updates. We also come to CWAC in January to get nominees for the budget committee to bring to the board. It looks like this year we have 2 positions that are going to come open. So we'll be coming to you again in January to get some nominations for that. Once all the operating budgets are back in at the beginning of February, the budget team starts meeting with all the departments, reviewing through their proposed budget and their capital programs. This year, we're also asking, and we put a form together, asking individuals to list out specific staff positions for travel training. So the business purpose, the training, and an estimate amount. So we have more detail in each group of training happening. But during these meetings, sometimes they miss something, we add to their budget. Sometimes there's something, no, we don't think we need, they remove it from the budget. And sometimes we're consolidating areas. Like a while back, we moved software all into digital solutions. So before it was spattered throughout and other people's, all sorts of departments' budgets in software. So we centralized it for the oversight and control, and also just for ease of budgeting then too. So there's some programs we centralize costs for the district. So after final adjustments to the budgets. We have the final budget decisions that, the end of, or mid-March. And then we start formulating, thanks to Jody, the budget document itself with the budget message. That then goes off to the printer and is ready for delivery to the budget committee on April 18th. And then we hold the budget committee meetings planned this year for May 9th. And once an approved budget comes out of that committee, it goes into a hearing with the board. We have it scheduled this year for 6/17. There's a public hearing to adopt the budget, and we bring the rates and charges at that same meeting in a separate public hearing. And then finally, after the budget's adopted, we go in and we finish up the publication of the budget, and usually that's done at the end of August. It takes a little while because we're waiting for some of the goal share final results to be put into the budget document. But then it's available out on our website, and then we also submit it to GFOA for the Budget Excellence Award. And then even then, but then the budget isn't done. The budget is a continual process. So now we're into implementing that budget. It starts July 1, and during the year, finance and our analysts are monitoring the budget along with the department programs. We're doing requests for personnel changes, and we're doing budget transfers related to them and monitoring, and then doing budget estimates at year end in order to formulate our next year's budget and our estimated ending balances in those funds.
How many people show up? How many publics show up at the public hearings?
I mean, not a lot. There's a few. I mean, I think when we went online, we maybe had more people that attended than when it was in person. One or two.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
But do you get a lot of people there that are critical and what kind of?
We've had a few people come from, in particular, I remember in the past from apartment complexes. They had some in Washington County and some in Portland, and they've just questioned why their bill was so much more expensive in Washington County. So we met with them after, we kind of walked through, the bill process for them, but.
But nobody comes and says you're spending too much money,
I don't remember that ever happening. Yeah, I mean, mainly it's, the rates. And when we've had the other groups come and say, we need to spend more on our natural systems program.
Do you guys have FTE that's endlessly unfilled, like you can never find whatever, a senior engineer or an accountant, or is it kind of like a rotating?
There are key positions that are really hard to fill. And I mean, I know in finance it has been, it's been really, really hard to fill. And then we finally had to underfill, and then that means you're training, which is great. I'm just glad to have staff but yeah, and I know they're engineering. I've heard they've had some, engineering is the harder one to find, keep people in. But they've even had that on the operating level, finding people interested in the operating program. So then that's why we did some different new programs where people can come in and learn from day one the job and kind of promote up. And then we've given them opportunities for advancement in those positions to keep them there, keep them happy.
Yes, I'm just wondering, kind of going back to Mark's question a little bit, like if there's a position that's always unfilled, but things are continuing on anyway, do you really need that position,
I don't know how to speak to that. So when we do have unfilled positions, we usually try to augment that work with contract. So we actually have service companies that come in and do the work. And oftentimes when you're working in contract, it's actually more expensive than a FTE. So I would say that we do have unfilled positions, but those are not for a long time. And we always try to look for ways to fill them. We do maintain a certain level of vacancy, but most of the cases, they are on a rotating basis.
Yeah.
As Kathy mentioned, we do have a couple of spots where we have unfilled positions that are hard to fill. And usually we look at the reasons, if the compensation, if they were not marketing to the right place, if they're just a really tight market and shrinking talent pool. So we try to work on strategies to fill those positions. I would say that we don't have something that's left open for too long. Usually we try to fill those positions.
Sure. Yeah.
You recruit on campus?
We used to do that, actually, we recently are having more discussions about how we become more into the positions. Most of our positions actually do require certain level of consistency. But quite a few of our department are saying to say, well, that if our talent pool is shallow, we actually do want to recruit from campus and then train them up along the career path. So we're doing more of that nowadays.
And only thing I want to add on here, so also new this year, in finance anyway, one of the FTE ads this year was an analyst, and we had an existing analyst on staff. So now we have 2 analysts within our finance group. We split their work. One works with business service, the other works with operations. And during the year, they're going to be there to support those groups with monitoring their budgets, development of their new budget, and just a resource on some of the capital program rollout. So a key position that we're really fortunate to have filled with some great staff, and look forward to how the budget year rolls out for us.
So maybe this is a rhetorical question, but I want to ask anyway. On the last foil, where you showed the financial analysts, can you help me understand the role of these financial analysts? Are they speaking for the groups in a language that finance understands, or are they like a watchdog group within those groups trying to make sure that the finances, the budgets, the spends are all in order? What's the role for them?
They are a resource for the groups, and they are set within. They've met. They're very closely knitted to the different managers in the groups they support. They've met with them. They introduced themselves. They provided, their services. They'll provide training related to, entry into Questica, the budget application. They also will help monitor programs, and they're the ones that they're a resource that is coming to the manager and saying, hey, I see an area where you're trending up. Do we need to look at a budget transfer, or are you aware of the resources being used, or are they coded in the right area? Are they in the right budget? So they're a resource really to the managers to help them keep on top of their budget and make sure we're doing the budget transfers that need to happen during the year. And then, of course, so a lot of times we get asked as they're developing their budget, they ask us to run reports showing them history on a certain expenditure type, or what did they spend last year? So they're looking at, what do I budget next year?
Yeah, I understand some of the services that they render. Because I've had financial analysts in my teams before. We've had them perform a function where they were also like a watchdog. Sometimes they see something out of the ordinary. They are the first ones to ask, figure out, and if needed, justify that, rather than just be the spokesperson or the promoter of the groups that they're a resource for. Do you understand the distinction, little difference there?
Yes, yeah. One of the other things too that the group is going to support is, once we've completed our cost of service study, they're going to continue to maintain those analysis moving forward as new actuals are available in new budget year. So they'll be maintaining some of those cost allocation studies and really helping with rate development for other groups that, for instance, like development services and regulatory affairs, they would look every year to adjust their rates and charges. So helping them justify those rate setting.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
With that, there is now an opportunity for public comment. And I don't know that we have any members of the public online or here. Just one quick ask. Nope. Okay. And so then I will pass it off to Elizabeth for announcements.
Thank you very much, Chair Wellner. This is the last meeting of CWAC for 2024. Thank you all for your service in 2024. We have no meeting in December. We will look forward to seeing you in January. Hopefully you caught Kathy's teaser. When we come back in January, we will both we'll be doing some organizational work, right? Appointing a new chair and vice chair. Thank you so much, Vice Chair Wellner, for stepping in. And we also have 2 spots on the budget committee. So if you had fun tonight, covering Kathy with questions and want to dig in further, this is your big chance.
And it's a good meeting. It's actually, it's a long day and it's a lot, the budget's like this thick, but it's a lot of good information and it really kind of gives you the inner workings of what we do here. So it's worthwhile. It's time well spent. That way I don't have to do it again.
There you go. Yeah. And just so folks know, Andy, Mark, and Elaine are continuing members on our budget committee. If anything there changes, let me know ahead of our January meeting. But that's the end of my announcements.
Okay.
And I believe you have to live in Washington County to be part of that.
Yes. Yeah. And
Elaine's on there too.
oh yeah, and Elaine's on there too. I'm so sorry. And also congratulations to Elaine.
Yeah.
For winning her election to the Sterling Conservation District. Joe wants to make an announcement. There you go.
All right. All right, with that, we're gonna adjourn 10 minutes early.
So, thanks, friends.